Morning, this is Barbara. S apparently
Morning.
hasn't gotten on. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, Pastor. I was just getting started to see if there were any questions because S hasn't gotten on yet that I know of.
He won't be on.
Or were you teaching today?
That's a loaded question.
No, it's not.
He won't, something came up. He's not on. And I'm on late because the doctors had called from the hospital. He's coming home today.
Okay, good news.
Yeah, but anyway, I when he told me he wasn't, I figured that some of you guys could bring us up to speed, bring me up to speed as to what he was talking about, so we can go from there. So, of course, there are always things that I would like to speak to, but let's see where the questions are in regards to what you guys have been talking about. So, Barbara Jean, continue, please.
Okay, are there any questions? I was not on Monday night, so
Okay.
I don't know what other teachers on who could update you about Monday night, but we were still talking about the 8th sense.
Right.
Does anyone have any other questions in general?
Well, this is Ron. Sorry I didn't answer earlier when S wasn't on, and I just kind of went into research mode here, trying to see something that I may have looked at that we could talk about. So that's what I was doing when you're asking about teachers. But I was on Monday, and I'm trying to remember the specifics about what we talked about. Of course, as continued talking about the importance of memory and your meditations and the energies from each other, using someone else's energy, those sort of things. And I'm trying to piece it all together, and I'm usually pretty poor at recaps. So if anyone else may have remembered anything specifically, please help me out here.
I wasn't on Monday. However, when we are talking about memory, there is a specific reference to memory. There are several specific references to memory in the scriptures, especially during the journey of the Hebrews out of Egypt and out of Babylon and other places. When it talks about place these stones at this point so that those who come behind you will know that you've been here, memory. When it talks about Abraham digging wells and the descendants of Abraham traveling the same journey that he traveled, memory. Visiting the sites of the wells, because all of them has a meaning, the names of those wells have a specific meaning, and all of it is about recalling what the ancestors not only endured, but also what the ancestors saw that the descendants would have to endure as well. So I don't know if he was approaching the concept of memory from that perspective. However, I do see now a direct connection between memory and the 8th sense. If you don't know where you have been, it's very, very difficult to know where you're going. It is also difficult to even ascertain where you are at this moment. For example, if we think that as most of us have been taught that our presence in this earth came from the womb of being enslaved, then we truly don't know where we came from. Because if we think that way, then we always have a an enslaved attitude. And I say that because it's not a servant's attitude. There's a huge difference between the servant's attitude and the enslaved attitude. When we began to understand where we came from, understand the journey of our ancestors, then it become more clear to us where we are in regard to our being in this place at this particular time. And that is when we get labeled as a troublemaker, or labeled as playing a race card, labeled as trying to make other people feel bad about what happened, is only because you know where you came from. And you endeavor to help others to see their journey as well. And when we can ascertain where we came from, we began to see things that are really guideposts on this journey. Remembering where we came from shows us where we are going. Without the memory of where we came from, we don't understand the eighth sense. The eighth sense is shown repeatedly in ancient history. When I say ancient history, I'm talking about the history that predates Egypt and any other society that has been on the face of the earth. When we look at the development of science and how the females in particular actually brought mathematics into this realm, we look at all of these things in the printing, writing of books, and the papyrus that they were written on, the usage of the value of libraries and the teachers, etc. Understanding the movements of the planetary bodies in the universe. When we look at those things, we begin to understand with a greater clarity what the eighth sense speaks to. In regards to the things that I just named, how is it that these people of ancient history were able to do this? How were they able to learn? What gave them the insight to learn to write, to count, or to understand the planetary bodies when they supposedly did not have telescopes? Don't know whether that's true or not. But how did these things happen? How did they know that music heals the body? If we look at the history of music from the days of antiquity, the first usage of music, or one of the primary uses for music by the physicians, was actually for the healing of the body and to deal with the attitudes of individuals. So knowing these things tells us where we came from. And when we look at that in relationship to how these understandings were shared throughout the world by way of shipbuilding and selling to different places around the world, when we see that sharing, then we understand what our responsibility is. Our memory is in every cell of our body. Our memory is not in our brain. Our memory is actually a spiritual bridge that connects us, not just from the spiritual to this world, but it connects us from the physical to the spiritual. In other words, we came across the bridge to the physical. Now it's time for us to return, to go across the bridge to the spiritual, so that we can understand it. Once we do that and we see the sharing that took place, then we are more apt to be sharers, meaning that sharing what we understand about the spiritual with everyone who crosses our pathway, not so much by verbally teaching them as by the lives that we live and the changes that we desire to be made. Without revenge, rather than seeking revenge, we seek reconciliation, because that's the nature of our creation. That is the womb of our origin, reconciliation and not revenge. Why? Because you don't seek revenge on those who need you. You don't seek revenge on your children. You don't seek revenge on those who have lost their way or never known the way. You seek reconciliation that you can be a guide and a guidepost for them. And that happens more so in the spiritual without the knowledge of those who need the guidance. They simply look retrospectively and see that not only have they changed, but they also see that everything around them is in the process of changing as well. And this comes as a direct result of the changes that are wrought by desire. Also, when we look at the sharing, we see from the annals of history that the Mayans and Incas and the other indigenous people around the world were taught what they understood about the universe, understood about mathematics, etc. They learned it from those who were the first people in the earth, from those who traveled to the coast of several continents on this earth for the very purpose of sharing. So I hope that that's pretty much the spirit of what as was talking about. Can you relate to that? Ron, can you address that?
Pastor, that's absolutely awesome. All the stuff you just said. I feel like I'm trying to remember as you were talking. I think it was it Jacob that after he wrestled said I didn't know I was in this place, and I may be getting it wrong. He saw God, and he, that's kind of how I feel. You opened my eyes and tied all this together, and I see it. And we didn't use those terms or those examples, of course, but it answers so many questions. For example, one of the questions we talked about was this thing called memory. It expands beyond my 62 years. It's a spiritual thing. It's not what we know memory to be. And you just explained that brilliantly in those examples that you gave. So these going back and looking at the will and recognizing the name and that coming back to you, that is a spiritual thing. And that shows you how we're all tied together, how we're all one. So when you speak of ancestors, then it is not just merely the bodies of a John or a Mabel or whatever the name is. It is the spirit of those who have come before you, whose spirit you carry now. It is the same energy that was before. And one other thing I got out of what you were saying that was extremely important, I guess out of my prayers and meditations, sometimes I guess I've looked in the wrong direction. And what I mean by that is I look for healing. I look for peace. I look for all these things that the love and compassion and the forgiveness. I have, we have a sense of saying we're going back to the beginning, where everything's back in the beginning, but you just put all that in perspective. Because we have at least I do, the tendency is when I think of ancestors, I do not think of technology. I do not think of the educated. I do not think that there is a vast chest of spiritual knowledge and treasures that I need. I don't see it that way. I think of pulling the energies from there, but you open that up to that it means so much more. And I see that now, and I see the connection with the eighth sense and how all that kind of the rhythm of all that, and even the all the things that Barbara talked about in the utterances, all of that just came back to me as you were explaining that. So the beginning is real, and that's this. The ancestors are a part of that. So that just kind of tied everything together to me. And there was one other point, and I can't think of it right now. But anyway, thank you.
Yes, sir. Anyone else?
This is Barbara. That spoke very loudly to me as well, because it's almost like the memories are a beacon to draw us to what we know in our, for lack of a better word, heart of hearts, who we are, and just like the rocks along the way spoke to the Israelites of certain things that were important in their spiritual growth. When as Ron was talking, as you were talking, the thing that's important for us in terms of our spiritual growth relates to memories of the love, the joy, the peace, the balance, the harmony, all of those things that are part of the essence of who we are, that we've forgotten about. And so, yeah, I agree that was a super summary, which just struck a chord about what memory is and what it can do, and the bridge it can create, as you said, between what the physical and the spiritual. So thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Questions or comments?
Yeah.
There's something else I want to address.
Yeah, good morning, Pastor. This is the Georgia Philly. I just wanted to also mention that ST, spoke about, the importance of communication. And, as an art, I think what has been said in terms of just going back and look at our ancestry, we talked about music, being an intelligence that, we were created with to have. And then at the same time, when S talked about the communication, it just made me think about the hieroglyphics or the metal netter, that our ancestors gave us visual communications in terms of us being able to see it from a linguistic standpoint. So I think that as we begin to appreciate the holistic, learning that, we are allowed to develop in all areas, I can begin to see, or we can begin to see how all of these senses work together. And it just made me really appreciate how wonderful and marvelously we are made. And so all of these things capitulate in terms of just our intelligence as a creator. And so I think that, the communication arts and the musical and the rhythmic and vibration is all part of that journey. And I kind of, just received it in a way as was speaking about the importance of the eighth sense in that aspect. I'm done.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? To further understand, to further see rather, or to bring a clarity from a different perspective to this, to the asset that we have called memory. We all have heard, excuse me, these words: "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Those words are found rather on the inside of the tombs of Egypt. They're found also in the temples that were constructed by the Mayans. By the Cushites. So the beginnings of these words spoke volumes to me when I read that they were words that were spoken long before there was an Abraham or there was an interest into this world of Jesus. These words spoke volumes to me, and what they said to me is this: they're in our understanding, but lack of knowing. There is a tree that's called the tree of creation, and those are my words, not the words that I read. A tree of creation, and to me, that tree of creation bore fruit. And the fruit that tree of creation bore was the fruit to understand where we came from. What am I saying? The creation story of Genesis, the creation story of all of the religions or the holy books of the world, all of the creation stories are a fruit that came from the tree of the original creation story. We only have a glimpse of what beginning is. The creation story is actually an allegory when we look at it from the perspective of the religions that we are aware of. When we look at the creation story from its origin, we see a more in-depth story. I'm in the process of pulling together an understanding of the first creation story known to man. And when we look at that first creation story, that will help us to see beginning more clearly, Ron, because you're constantly talking about that, and you're absolutely right. We cannot move forward without beginning. Why? Because beginning is memory. If you cannot remember where you came from, as said earlier, you don't know where you're going, neither do you know where you are. So an example of the original creation story speaks to the idea that when the gods Ashura, which the Greeks call Osiris, when we connect them to the symbology of animals, it was not a worship of animals. It was a symbolism to show us or to help them to see the attributes of the energy forces that were being represented by the symbology of animals. The idea of worshiping an animal is so different.
Pastor, say that one more time about the animals. I missed that. Say that one more time.
Okay. Yeah. What I was saying is that when we read about the worship of animals by the Cushites or the Egyptians, the story that's totally wrong. When we look at the creation story from this OC is that these were not God's worship. They were not ignorant of what was happening. They knew what they were doing. The only thing they did was use it as symbol. For example, the eagle for the U.S. speaks to the power of the nation, but we don't worship the eagle. The bear of Russia speaks to the power of the nation, but we don't worship the bear. The stalk brings the baby. We all know that is not true, but we don't worship the stalk. So when we talk about the lion in Egyptian history, and we see the lion on the head of a woman, what we're looking at is an understanding of the feminine energy that has the power to bring forth life and the courage to protect that life. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And so what you said was it was reflective of the energy of what the animal represents, not and the energy behind what the animal represents is much bigger than the animal or the physical animal itself. It's just symbolic of that energy that taps into infinite energy in a sense.
Absolutely. So, and that's what I'm in the process of trying to pull all of that together, because when we read about gods in the Kushite kingdom, what we're reading about, what we're actually seeing, is a mistranslation or misunderstanding or a purposely misunderstanding of what's happening. When we speak of gods, they are speaking of energy forces that have brought things into existence. And at some point during the course of the understanding the eighth sense, I want to bring this to our memory, because being able to understand the first writings or the first understandings of beginning, which is the creation story, of course, gives us a greater advantage when it comes to bringing change to this earth, and when it comes to understanding how to repurpose energy, how to approach the energy that needs to be repurposed, or how to repurpose the energy that's thrown at us. That is a type of energy that seeks to control. That's what the understanding of the creation story does. Without this foundation of understanding the essence of the creation story, then we don't really have anything to build on. When we look at the annals of time, we see that the creation story wasn't before there was an Abraham. We see that the creation story was in existence about the universe before there was a Babylon, even though the Babylonians are given credit for astronomy. It couldn't be further from the truth. We see when we began to look at these stories, look at the history, what we began to see is that when Abraham speaks of the land of Ur was established by the Kushite kingdom. And the things that took place there, when Abraham talks about the worshiping of gods being made by the hand, that was the inhabitants of that land misunderstanding what they were being taught, and they started making these images and worshiping them, submitting to them, bowing to them, looking to them for strength and power, looking to them for sustenance. And that grew into where we are today because of the memories of Abraham and how he came out of that. We look at Abraham moving out of it. However, we do not remove the images that were created from Abraham. Abraham walked away from the images, but we have held on to those images: the communion table, the baptismal pool, the Bible, the book itself and its writings. These etchings or these physical images that have been made, and that takes us back to no engraven images of anything that's in enlightenment, meaning that a communion table should not exist. Why? Because it is being worshipped. It is a table being worshipped because we don't understand what that represented in the spiritual realm. That table where we call communion, the table that Jesus talked about not eating from again until we are in the Father's kingdom. What does that mean? Jesus says, I will not partake of this anymore until we are together in my Father's kingdom, until we are on the same page. He is not talking about literal blood, literally wine and bread. What Jesus is literally talking about is spiritual life, as well as the human life. That's what he's talking about. And when he says that, he's saying, when you come to an understanding that I have of our existence, our being in this earth having come from a womb, when you understand that, then we will together partake of the food of the table, meaning we will understand where we are, the bread of life. We will understand what spiritual life is, and know how to nourish it. And that's where we are now. Our desire, when we talk about change and balance, we are talking about a desire to bring nourishment to what was in the beginning, to give life to it again, to see the value of embracing it, and the value of walking with the energy of it, the value of being able to rise above the ignorance that there has been brought into the earth by religions, rise above that, but not leave it behind. Rise above the ignorance and bring those who have gotten caught up in that, bring them with us as we travel this journey across the Jordan, meaning crossing from one side of the river to the other. We are not bringing. Huh? Go ahead.
As you talk, what comes to my mind is we've just been so misled and bamboozled. If you remember the Westerns, when they wanted to throw people off track, they would turn to signs that point to a certain direction, or certain town, or certain whatever. They would turn the sign around to throw folk off track so they go the wrong way. I feel like a lot of what we've had along this path called Christianity is someone who's turned the signs around so that it distracts us and puts us on the wrong path. And what we're doing now is understanding that's not the essence of what we were supposed to be, or where we were supposed to, quote unquote, go, not meaning a location, but go in terms of being. And so we're at the point where we know that we don't have the bigger picture, that we the road we're on, we got to go back to the main road, in a sense, if you see what I'm saying. And so the main road is much broader than this narrow road, these narrow memories that Christianity has given us. That the bigger part of who we are is tied to more than the symbology of Christianity. And so it's almost like we got to understand the parts of creation from the broader perspective of the broader cultures, because religion has put its own definers around certain things, and the more definers they put around things, the more limiting it has been for us to understand who we are. And so it's almost like that caterpillar having to break free of the cocoon finally. It's that same kind of sense of, okay, I've been in this constrained type space, and now it's time to fly. Now it's time to be who I am. So as you talk, that's the essence of what I'm feeling.
And you're right on track. I mean, think about it. I think the example that you used about the worm in the caterpillar in the cocoon is excellent, because we have been living in a cocoon of religion all of these years. And in order for us to become a butterfly, we must understand the essence of our being. And we were spun into this cocoon by virtue of our desire. We were caterpillars just crawling along our way. And when we started seeking to understand what's real about the holy books of the world and what's real about spirituality, what happened? We begun to eat the leaves of life, and we ended up in a cocoon. And being in that cocoon, we're being not inundated, but we are being enlightened. And the enlightenment that we are receiving is giving us opportunity, not only for us to come out of the cocoon and be the butterfly, but for everyone who has been caterpillars to become a butterfly. Our objective is to bring people from a caterpillar to a butterfly without having to struggle through the journey that we have struggled with to get to a place of understanding what we are really talking about when we talk about desire. And I am thoroughly convinced that it is absolutely impossible for us to get to the apex of desire if we don't begin at the foundation of the understanding origins. What am I saying? There is no way that we can understand origins without understanding the foundation that was laid by the Kushite kingdom. We are not talking about race. We are talking about spirituality. And sometimes we as a people get uncomfortable when we talk about the accomplishments of the African. We get uncomfortable when we talk about the foundation that we were to build upon having been laid by Africans, Kushites. We get uncomfortable with that. Why? Because at the cellular level of our being, the rulers of this earth made it uncomfortable to talk about the reality of truth. And that is the reason we seek so many times to avoid mentioning Kushite, to avoid mentioning African. We do that because we have been thoroughly indoctrinated into a type of philosophical religious belief that it is wrong for us to tell the truth. And we have to get away from that. Think about it this way, and I'm not apologetic at all, by the way. The reason that the world is in the shape that it's in, the reason that we have had buried these memories to such a depth until it's virtually impossible to pull back the scales so we can remember where we came from. Why is that? It's because the male energy of the European has destroyed what the world was supposed to be. And we have to reconstitute it. And when you think about it, the males in this nation, the males of Caucasian origin in this world have done one thing and one thing only. They have sought to be the gods of this earth. They have forced people to function in their presence as though they are the gods. Don't look me in the eye. You can't look in God's face and live. Bow before me. You must worship me. I'm not calling you by your last name because you don't have an origin. I'll call you by your first name. You cannot sit next to me because I am superior to you. You have to sit at the back of the bus because I am the God who rides at the front of the bus. All of these things are things that have conditioned us to be afraid to tell the truth. And we have to get beyond that. We have to get to the place where we are. For example, George talks about so often. I'm talking about my brother George. He talks about so often the waters of noon. When we get into foundational understanding of the creation story, what you're going to see about the waters of noon is that they are the same waters that's mentioned in Genesis when it talks about and the darkness covered the deep. It's speaking in those terms. And the darkness covered the deep is simply a piece of fruit from the tree of the creation story from the beginning. Does that make sense to you? Okay, do you see what the journey that we're on, or at least the road that I'm making every attempt to carry us down?
Yes.
So there is a journey that we have to take, and the journey that we have to take is the journey of a deeper meaning. Now, right up until this point, what is taking place is our footing, our foundation has been based upon understanding who we are. That's our spiritual foundation. We understand that we are Elohim because we are in the image of Elohim. But do we understand the essence of the human in terms of its creation? Do we understand the responsibility that has been thrust upon the human? Do we understand how the human functions in conjunction with the spirituality of the human? Do we understand that this body is like something that's inanimate lying on the ground, and then you blow air into it, and it comes alive. Its eyes pop open, and it looks around and sees other things around it that are material in nature, and it sees individuals as opposed to the whole. And now the question becomes, what do we do with this? Why are we in this place where we are? It is my contention that when we began to understand the foundation that was laid by those who were birthed into this physical realm first, then we will know how to function. We will know how to embrace with a greater clarity and with a greater determination the essence of our being. The idea that it is from the black mud from the waters of noon that the human was brought into the earth. These things speak volumes about the nature of our being. Think about it this way. When we look at the soil, especially when we start talking about agriculture, when we look at the soil, when we look at black soil, that soil is there for what purpose? That black soil will grow anything. It does not need to be infused or injected with anything. It will grow. But the further you get away from that type of soil, the more difficult it becomes to grow crops. So these things are there for a reason. These are not just allegories. These are realities. These are not just words. These are truths. And this is not about philosophy. It's not about history. It is more about essence than anything else. And the sooner that we are able to see that everything is about essence and not about history and not about philosophy and not about superiority, the sooner we get to that place, we will begin to understand more of who we are and make it much easier to bring others to that place of understanding. Questions or comments? And by the way, I'm still talking about memory. No questions, no comments?
This is Vermel. I have a question. Back when you started unveiling this to us. You used the term creation, tree, and the fruit.
Tree,
Say,
yes, ma'am.
that is not the same, or is it the same as the tree of life?
The tree of life is part of the tree of creation.
Okay, all right.
Without the tree of life, there is no creation. It's a part of it. Let me put it this way, maybe you better understand it. When we talk about the tree of life in regards to creation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Life, the tree of life, or the source of all life, is the womb that brings about this creation story.
Say
So
that
what
one.
happens is the source of all life is the womb, WOMB, that brings about the creation story. Out of that womb comes creation. What happened is we think linear,
Mm-hmm.
and our linear thinking takes us from Genesis creation and carries us to a garden, and the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. When in essence, it should not have been called the tree of life. It should be called the tree of functionality and the tree of dysfunctionality. The tree in the garden should have been a tree that should have been referenced as the source that gives us the knowledge, ability, wisdom to function as Elohim. And the tree of the knowledge of good and evil gives us the ability to function as humans, beings unaware of the spiritual essence of our being. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Any questions or comments about that? Oh, you're welcome.
Could you say that again, please, about the tree of knowledge of good and evil?
The tree of knowledge of good and evil is the tree that should be referenced as dysfunctional. We are not able, and that's where we are now, because in this physical realm, we see clearly that the same place where there is life, there is also death, or there is where there is life in this body. What we see spurts of functionality. What that means, we talked about how we're driving and we know a car is going to cut in front of us. That is a glimpse of functionality in the spiritual, of the human being spiritual. Road rage is, I'm not going to let them in. That's dysfunctionality, but they reside in the same physical being. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Questions or comments?
I think you when you because you've said that before, and the lineal thinking, and I think that's part of what us is talking about with us being stuck. I get stuck there too, and it's hard to see things clearly from a spiritual perspective, because that is how we've been taught to look at things. And that kind of thinking also produces the illusion of everything has to be logical. This has to make sense at some kind of level, and it keeps you from seeing things spiritually. That example you were talking about, that takes you to the place that says, I need to brake before I get to this intersection because somebody's going to run this light. You don't know what that looks like. The result of it is, I need to brake, because and that comes to you in an instant, and you hear it or you don't hear it. But if you hear it, you do something about it immediately. But what that looked like before it got there, before you got that message, you can't tell me, you can't describe it. And I think just in thinking about that, at least from my mind, when I think of beginning, I want to see something, and that something is nothing. It is the expectation that there is a spiritual world, and I trust that, and that's what I live in, and that's my level of awareness. And so that's nothing logical that I can draw any conclusions from or shape anything. So that's why it is so difficult to see it sometimes, or to even put it in words. And I think that's why sometimes our lessons are going in that direction. We are having to experience more than we can explain.
Okay. You're right. It's difficult. The thing that you were talking about, Ron, what we call logic is totally illogical. When we look at what we have learned from philosophy, what we have learned from religion, that's totally illogical. When you look at it based upon the creation story, based upon what the words are actually saying, when this allegory called the Bible is written, it is a combination of stories that have been passed on from generations, and the logic of them is what we see now. It is illogical for us to believe that one who created us and loves us is going to put us in a place called hell. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that someone who is said to be love itself can do something like that. That doesn't make sense. What does make sense is that in our efforts to be in this earth and physical and religious and not spiritual, what makes sense is we will be put in the lake of fire, meaning that we will be put in a place of repose. We will be that place of where we are leisurely being taught, being brought to a place of understanding. That is the burning of the dross that covers the gold. That's burning off those things that should not be there. That's the logic of it. Everything has been turned upside down. And honestly, I do believe that I can help you to see the spirituality of everything that is. I can help you to see spiritual, the spirit, see it, but not with your eyes. The eyes are only there to see the results of what the eye sees. The thing that the eye sees is manifested in those things that we see with our eyes, or the things that we experience with our emotions. The results of the eye experience of showing us love is what we feel. The love that we feel for our children is different from the love that we feel for our friends, is different from the love that we feel for our spouse or our significant other. It's different. But yet, guess what? It is still love. There is no picture that can be painted of that. There is no sketch artist that can depict that on a sheet of paper. There is no sculpture that can sculpture that from the clay. That is an experience. However, when we see the manifestation of what has been created, we can paint the picture of a tree or a landscape. We can photograph a mountain range, and we can experience the beauty of it. There were pictures being sent. Kish is currently working out of Phoenix periodically, and her travels through Arizona, I'm living them through the pictures that she's sending. These are not only beautiful photographs, but she and I have an affinity for sunrises and sunsets. So I get a lot of those from her. And to see that, regardless of how many I get, all of them are different. This is the result of creation that we see with our eyes. But what we are experiencing through our emotion for it is a love for the art of it, but also the love for the one who sends them and love for the creation of it all. Capturing with that, what we see with our eyes is to capture the manifestation of what has been brought into being from a spiritual perspective. Does that make sense, Ron?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It does. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Good morning, everyone. I'm at a stop now. One of the things, and this is opinionated, that Christianity needs, yet Christianity does not want, is a good antagonist. If you want to bring forth some righteousness out here and just disassembling the things that we have been taught, somebody got to be an antagonist. And every one of us on the phone, we're an antagonist because we do not follow the script of Christianity. So therefore, we're looked at as outlaws. So to shake up what we have been taught, I'm glad that Will, Phil, Jackson, Drayton, Ellison, those young adults, they starting off better than I did because they're getting it early. And we don't follow the script. Number one, if you look at it, and like I say, this is opinionated now. Females teaching Greater New Faith and Foundation. Christianity does not want that. And from a historical aspect, when you look at what Alexander the Great or Alexander the Thief and Aristotle did, when they went into Kemet and when they went into Ethiopia, they removed anything of significance by way of the female. So, in being an antagonist, you have to know the origin, because some people can look at the antagonist as a bad person. Yet if you know the origin of the antagonist, he or she may not be looked at as an antagonist. You just got to know where their heart is. Religion and Christianity is narcissistic because European males are narcissistic. And every day that I don't take a chance to know about myself, know where I come from, know some history, consciously I take on the European trait. If I'm in a discussion with Monique and it ain't going my way, I will say, because I pay the bills up in here. That's why y'all need. That's a European way of handling a discussion. So, in conclusion, I was at an AAU basketball game with Mr. and Mrs. McKinney. They were sitting right beside me. And somehow it got on a conversation of giving. And I just told Mr. and Mrs. McKinney, look, I don't give nothing to no church. That's that minister job to keep that lights on, male or female, just like it's my job to keep the lights on in my house. I say I believe in making investments in people. 5%, Buddha. If you're a person, I'm going to make an investment in you. And Miss McKinney said, I can tell James Walter Ritchie cover you. I like, huh? Reverend Richard. I like, oh, okay, dope then. So if I was to say that on my mother's side of the family, they lose their head. You wrong. So to disassemble Christianity, somebody has to be the antagonist to bring forth righteousness. And like I say, like, it is opinion. All of us are antagonists.
George, let me stop you right there. There are times when what you bring to the table is opinionated. This is not opinionated. 99% of what you've said is reality. It's not opinionated at all. It is true that we are antagonists. And as you said, not by choice, but because that's how we are viewed based upon our not following the script. That's a reality, not an opinion. And I appreciate what you brought to the table. The other thing that when you mentioned Kemet in Ethiopia, that brought to mind something. The reason that the name the label of Ethiopian came into being is to get rid of the reality of what people were called. Everywhere you see Ethiopian, you can substitute Cushite. Ethiopia simply means black. Cushite speaks to a culture, an origin of humanity. It speaks to the origin of everything that was brought into existence in this earth or in this physical realm. Ethiopia speaks to the skin tone of a group of people. And it was done purposely so even in the days of Solomon. What we are doing is losing sight of who we are because of the limitations of the book that we have been given and told that this is the way things are, as opposed to being told that these are allegories that speaks to a greater truth. All of this was done purposely so, and you are absolutely right. It was done by males whose origin is Europe. And it was done for the purpose of subjugation. It was done for the purpose of elevation, elevating them to the place of godship. We have to keep our eyes on what we see before us and our eye on things that we desire to see. When we're able to keep our eyes on what's before us, our eye will show us what came before what we see. And those things that were brought into existence before we were able to see with our eyes are the same energy forces that we are dealing with right now. Please understand this. The energy forces that we are seeking to repurpose are the energy forces that were brought into this place for the purpose of humanity being who it was created to be. In order for us to be Elohim, we must bring order to this garden of earth that we were placed in. We must till the soil. We must till the hearts of men and plant the seeds of truth in order for us to bring this place called earth in line with the place of our origin, the realm of the spirit. When we are able to do that, then we understand why it is that plants respond to conversation from us, we will understand why it is that we are capable of speaking to everything that was created and bringing it in line with its essence. I received from someone, it was Keisha, that's what it was, I forgot about that. This short video. On this video, the lions had killed a caribou, and there were two men, and these two men, I forget what part of Africa it was in, but these two men had left the village in search of food. And they came upon this caribou being eaten by a group of lions. And they sat there and watched them. And the lions looked at them. And their gaze did not divert from the lions. They were fixed on the lions. And they were looking them in the eye. And the two men stood up with spear in hand, did not raise it in a defensive or offensive manner. And they simply walked towards those lions and kept their gaze in their eyes. There were about 8 lions aboard there, and every one of them ran away from that caribou. They understood that they had a short period of time before the lions realized that they had been bluffed. They cut from that caribou one of the legs to take back for food. They did not try to drag off all of it so the lions would have anything. They took what they needed, and they simply walked away. And when they walked away, the lions returned to that carcass and continued to eat. What am I saying to you? These men understood their essence. They understood that they were sent into this earth to dominate, even though that might not have been their words. And they dominated that scene, that situation, that circumstance for the purpose of feeding the village. Had they made an attempt to take it all, the lions would have attacked them. And that many lions, 2 men, are not a match for. They did it all without resistance.
But they had to have a memory of, they
Yes.
had to have a right memory of what their function was in order to be able to do that.
Yes.
And so they didn't have anything to distract them from who they were supposed to be. They just had a memory that this is who I am, this is my function, and this is what I do. You understand what I'm saying?
And my response to that was, you know what? I would be looking for my food someplace else. Why? I'm just not in that place right now. But anyway, I say all that to say this.
But Pastor,
yes.
But Pastor, we are at that place. We are. That's what we are reconstructing right now. When we were in Africa and we were on this safari kind of thing, we saw the kids out there taking care of the cattle, and surrounding them were giraffes and all kinds of animals. And this one cow got away, and this little boy with a staff went running behind the cow because he knew the importance of that animal to his family. And he didn't even think about placing himself in harm. He did what he was supposed to do functionally. He had the function of protecting the cow as it ate and bringing it back to his family in the evening and putting it in this enclosed briar thing so that animals wouldn't take it. And so that memory was placed in him by family or ancestors or whomever. But he did not think about fear. He just feared not being able to bring that cow back home because that calf back home because his family needed that animal.
Thank you. And that's a classic example as well. It's all in your environmental teachings, and they don't. It's not like indigenous people think about, well, I'm gonna be spiritual today, or should I be a human, or should I respond because I'm only human? That's not it. Indigenous people do not think about religious antics. Indigenous people just live life. They live from the inside out as opposed from the outside in. And that's the reason that it is so different to us. The way they live is logical. The way we live is not, because we're always struggling with something. Indigenous people left alone to live their lives are not. And by the way, Barbara, that safari, Kiswahili for journey anyway. So a safari is just a journey, even though it's been made into something else. Any other questions or comments?
I was looking at something when at the beginning of our lesson today, Vermil and Miss Barbara was talking and asked, was anybody on? And I immediately grabbed my Bible and started looking at something in case Pastor didn't get on, or S, I didn't know S wasn't going to be here, but I want to read two verses that you guys just explained that I had questions on. This is what I was looking at. Of course, I'm in Genesis chapter 2, and verse 19 says, and out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called a living creature, that was his name. Verse 21 says, and the Lord God fashioned into a woman the rib which he had taken from the man and brought her to the man. Now, those two verses have something in common. And although I've looked at them before and we've probably discussed them a number of times, I still have questions about it. The one thing was, at this particular time to me, why did he have the man, why, when he tells him, you need a helper that's suitable for you, why is it at this time that he brings the animals? And what does brought mean? Because we look at this, because in both those instances, he brings the animals and he brings the woman back to the man. So it looks like God is external. It looks like this is not an internal thing that is taking place. So I'm listening to what you're saying, and I think what I'm seeing here is this is the part of that memory that's being formed, is that the brought is not, I'm bringing this from an external place to you. The brought is, I'm taking this, showing you this from an internal perspective, meaning this is something that you are able to see from a human perspective, but from a spiritual perspective, looking at it from your eye as opposed to your eyes, you see more than just the animals. In other words, what this is saying is, this is what you are to dominate. These are the thoughts, feelings, and emotions that are going to surface out of you that you are to dominate. And these things are, if you allow that same lion to dominate you, then you become selfish. You become animalistic. You become insensitive to people or what those needs are. So I bring these to you that you can see internally that portion of you that is that is spiritual and has dominion over these things. The part about the brought of the woman, again, that is how you control these things. That is how you become one with the universe, is by seeing this balance. The woman represents the balance. She represents the spiritual essence of who you are. So, and I'm not, just on the surface looking at this, when all of this is kind of coming to me as you guys explained this, and looking at the creation story. There's so much more here than we've ever imagined. And every time we take a look at it, I have a lesson on one thing, something else just kind of pops out to me. So this is something that I saw, because it just kind of ironically what I was looking at before we started today. Just wanted to add that. Thank you.
I want to speak to that, Ron, and the reason is because I saw something as you were speaking. When it says that he called them what their names, right? He gave them character, right? The character of the animals are intact with what they were supposed to be. What changed that is man became more and more dysfunctional when it came to being one with everything that exists. And the more dysfunctional man became, the animal picked up those traits of dysfunctionality. And the anger, the fear, the greed, the selfishness, all of these attributes were the attributes that were then instilled in the animals. Animals did not become what we call wild and vicious for no reason. The garden keeper is the reason that the attitudes of animals are what they are. Because the garden keeper became dysfunctional in his thoughts and actions. And that bled into the animals. And that is the reason that that indigenous people or groups of people around the world who still live in their society without being tainted by our society are able to live in harmony, the animals with the forest, with everything around them, because their attitude has not become tainted as ours have. They are still functional. They are still functional. That makes sense. I see a red bird looking at my window. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, it does.
I have a question about that, Pastor. And I think on the whole, I certainly get that. But I wondered, what came to mind as you were talking was, what about these indigenous societies that seemed off, like, the cannibals and and maybe it's just my lack of knowledge of history. But I was wondering what tainted some of the early indigenous groups that we don't know of having contact with our society.
Those indigenous groups, the energy flows of the earth, right, changes people's attitude. It influences people. And I don't know what would cause them to get to that point of being cannibals, other than the energy in the earth is cannibalistic. Example, they talk about the sacrifice of that the Mayans made in terms of blood sacrifices. They talk about cannibalism in terms of other cultures are devouring human flesh. The question that becomes, when did it happen? When did the sacrifices that we are taught about come into being? What brought them into being? And the other question is history telling us the truth? the Native Americans were told to be, were said to be scalpers, right? Who did the scalping? The Native Americans did it after they would find their members of their community who had been scalped. And the scalping was for money, to prove that they had killed a Native American. However, when we look at it on TV or when we read about it in quote-unquote American history, it was the Native Americans. So the question is, did the victors who wrote the stories write it the way they wanted it to be, depicting people in the way that they were? Because we know for a fact that Europeans became cannibalistic when they reached the shores of this country and were not able to feed themselves during the winter. All of that was shifted to someone else. Does that make sense, Rainey?
Yeah, that's why I said I realized history. I don't know if it was my knowledge of history, but as you said, history is written by those left. So, but yeah, that idea of the inner flow there makes sense to me too. I'm just curious about why that energy.
I'm not saying it did not happen. I am saying that I question history when it speaks to it, because of previous experiences with those who wrote the history.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. No, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Anyone else? Any other questions? I want to leave you with this. There is no understanding of spirituality without endeavoring to understand history. There is no embracing of spirituality. There is no embracing of I am. If there is hesitance about looking at the truth of the origin of not only this earth, but humankind, it is impossible to understand the origins of humankind without understanding the writings, the history of the Cushites. The Cushites are the foundation of everything that we know or should know about the earth and its existence. I remember being fascinated when I read about Aristotle figuring out how to pump water, because water in its true nature will only, you could only raise it or pump it to, I forget how many feet it is, before it equalizes with gravity and it won't flow, or you can't pump it further. I was fascinated by that. And until I read that all of this had been stolen from the Cushites, who had bathtubs, who had irrigation systems. We have to always be committed to looking further, looking deeper, embracing the truth no matter what it says. But never, ever down away from the foundation of the existence of this earth and its inhabitants. No matter what people say to us, and as George said, willing us to be antagonists, it's okay. as long as the reason they are calling you an antagonist is because you are diligently not only searching for, but speaking the truth without regard to whose presence you are in. Questions or comments about that?
Pastor
Thank you for
Ron, I
Go ahead.
don't have a yeah, I don't have a question about that, but I remember something that I wanted that you reminded me of earlier, and George spoke to it when he talked about music a little bit, and I forgot about what I just wonder if the reason why we as a people are so attached to music, the memory, the history, and looking at the examples you gave in scripture, in its own way, does the energy of music take us back there? And we don't, of course, see it from that perspective, but can it be that it is tied to our rhythmic beginning with the universe, and it takes us there to begin, or to some form of beginning, whether it may not always be what am I trying to say? It may not be from a spiritual perspective per se, because that isn't how we see it when we're listening to rhymes and in rhythm with things. But it can that, can it be that in its own way, as much as we can see with our eye when we're listening to different types of music, that is what it's doing to us. It is tying to our beginning. It is tying to our history and our memories. Do you think that is one of the reasons why certain beats of rhythm is so popular to us?
I do indeed. And I'll give you an example. How many people of your generation or mine of African descent really embrace hard rock? Think about it. Why is it that it doesn't appeal? Because it's not rhythmic. There is no set rhythm to it. The body cannot flow in clean lines of movement with hard rock. And that is why people who move to hard rock look like somebody just poured hot water on them, no rhythm at all. If we look at the history of music, the rhythm of it originated with us. The instruments that made the music and the instruments that found harmony were the instruments that were created by Africans. The notes were brought into existence by the African. And there are many, many writings from archaeologists from all over the world who have researched that. And what they all have concluded is that music in its rhythmic way was introduced to humanity by the African, and every deviation from the notes of the music that was brought into existence by the African is a deviation from the rhythm of the universe. Even the music of Beethoven were brought from the music of the African. It does not matter whether it is classical music, R&B, jazz, blues. That's where it has its origin. Hard rock did not have its origin there. The notes do not flow. Does that make sense to you, Ron?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Any questions or comments?
I was just going to add that even in those hard rock tunes, if you go to any of those band leaders and talk to them, they'll tell you where they got their how they listen to music and what music they listen to, and how they arrived at the rock part. I don't know, but they got it from listening to blues, and they got it from listening to R&B music, and they came to their own conclusion from that. But it's just funny to me that that's what they studied to learn what they did.
Where they mixed up the notes. They changed the rhythm. Think about this. There are white people who sing the blues. Matter of fact, it was white people who kept the blues alive because it was dying out. What did they do? They listened at B.B. King and mimicked him. They listened at Buddy Guy and mimicked him. They who mimicked them, like the Righteous Brothers, they listened at R&B and they reproduced it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, indeed.
So when we look at that, and why are we talking so much about music? Because music is truly the language of the universe. And at the roots of music, we will find that the music notes that were played for healing, that were played for welcoming someone into the village, that was played for celebration, all of it was in rhythm with the universe. And any notes of music that is not in rhythm with the universe grates on you. It doesn't feel right, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Pastor?
Yes, ma'am.
It's funny you would say that because Monday night I went to the park and I was walking while we had Bible study. And it was this African family out there, and he had a drum. And he just started beating on the drum. And I looked at everybody's response. It's like all the Africans stopped what they were doing, even the people who were playing tennis. It's like everybody was stopping to look to see where that was coming from. So it's just funny that you're mentioning how different music affects the African. That's all I wanted to say.
And that is the reason that drums were illegal for enslaved people to possess. Because of its rhythm and its message. Well, let me say this. I've often thought about why did our Creator allow us as a people to lose any contact with our language, with our culture, with the geographical locations of our origin? Why is it that the Creator allowed the enslavers to take someone who spoke people who spoke different languages, to take those from Nigeria and mix them with other groups of villages in Nigeria who did not speak the same language? Why is it that they mixed them with people from Angola and Ghana and made it a point to make sure that they diluted the languages as much as possible? Why? Why would the Creator allow that if the expectation of our Creator was for us to return to it even after having been brought across the great river in chains? Why? Could it possibly be that we lost our contact with our language, with our culture, for the express purpose of forcing us to search for who we really are and to embrace a language that is understood by everyone, regardless of what language they normally speak to communicate with each other. Could it possibly be that we were put in a position where the only language that we could truly embrace and communicate through is the language of love? Could it possibly be that the language of loving kindness is our language, which means that you don't have to study the linguistic nuances of our language in order to express it or understand it. And this language of love is the reason that a spouse, a parent, can stand up and Charleston and forgive Dylan Roof. Is it possible that the strength of our forgiveness is found in the language that we speak, the language of love? And that love is wrapped in forgiveness. Is that, what do you think about that?
It's wrong, Pastor. I love that. It was another thought that I had that I forgot that I think ties into that. The George talks about and protagonist and the what's the other one? The antagonist. If you look at the relationship between those two, the antagonist role is to make the protagonist do something. So without that antagonist, the protagonist never grows. The protagonist either learns something, most of the time in every situation, learns something about him or herself. The protagonist has a moral that it has to release. It has a truth that it has to go and search out and find. It has a people that it has to free. And those are just some of the roles that the protagonist does. But for whatever reason, that protagonist mostly is wrapped up in fear, or he has something that's keeping him from fulfilling what that role is. So the antagonist comes him in whatever is necessary to get him to on that chase to finding truth and finding himself. So if you look at it from that perspective and kind of embrace everything that you say, that has brought those things out of us and pushing us in that direction, and that is no coincidence.
I like that. The protagonist has indeed brought us to that place. I do believe that you started with what George was saying, living outside of the laws of Christianity. But in a broader sense, the antagonistic nature of those who are in power currently in this nation has brought us to a place of being antagonists to the extent that we understand trying to change things through voting, make an effort to change things through marches and politics is not the role of a spiritual antagonist. The spiritual antagonist understands that its role is to change things through love and kindness, with a deep desire for these physical beings to realize what being human really is. Questions, comments? No questions, no comments? If someone's begin to speak. Okay, guys. Thank you for your presence, and we will speak with you later, tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.